Here's a question nobody wants to ask out loud. How do you lead from your actual values without making it weird? And I'm not talking about the corporate approved version. Maybe those values come from faith, from family, or a philosophy that you have developed over years of hard-lived experience. Either way, there are invisible lines at work, and most of us have learned to edit ourselves, to not quite cross that boundary and bring our full self to work because we want to stay safe. Today, I'm talking to Debbie McGee. She's a CPA who ran global HR work for a Fortune 500 company. She burned out chasing achievement and then rebuilt her entire leadership approach based off of what she had learned. And for her, that was something deeper. It's faith. The question she wrestled with applies to all of us, whether you're religious or not. How do you bring your whole self to work? What happens when it makes someone uncomfortable? And is authenticity even possible when you're not the one in charge? This is The Shift Show. Let's get to it. So, Debbie, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to The Shift Show.
Thanks, Rachel. It's so good to be here. When we met back in Paris, this was a really big thing that I wanted to happen in 2026. So thank you for making sure that it did.
Oh, it's just an absolute privilege, particularly in my year of entrepreneurship in 2025, the right things just kept landing in my lap in so many ways. And, I think we'll talk a little bit about faith and being part of a mission and having a higher purpose today. But I just think that those kinds of alignment, I don't know if we call it happy accidents or serendipity or...
I don't believe in any coincidences or accidents. It's definitely, you were meant to be in Paris and I was meant to meet you.
I know. I totally agree. I would just love to get into kind of the story. You spent decades climbing the corporate ladder. You had an amazing story from, Big Four accounting down to this kind of global HR operation. So as someone also who came from a more maybe technical background and then, came into this HR space, your story was really intriguing to me. And so I would love if you could just talk a little bit about your journey so the audience kind of knows who you are, and then talk about your time out that you call and what happened.
Sure, absolutely. So, I think like most of us in our 20s, we have this goal of what we're going to be when we grow up. I've always been a very goal-oriented person. I'm fortunate my husband is also a very goal-oriented person. So we set these goals in our 20s that we reached by the time we were in our 40s. Then you go, well, now what? But, going back, I always wanted to be in a Big Four accounting firm. I had this vision that one day this little South Carolina girl was going to have a big office in Atlanta and, a corner suite, which eventually I did. And it was going to be all these amazing things. And as I went through the process, especially in the late 80s and 90s, it was tough. I mean, accounting was a very male-dominated field. I think I was telling someone this morning that even in that field, I remember there were 500 partners in that specialty. Rachel, there were only 25 women total. And this was back in probably about 1997, 1998. And I looked at those women, I go, oh, that's who I want to be. They were not nice people. And family life did not exist. I was married to a military man who was moving constantly. Before there was remote work or any of that type of stuff, moving all the time. I had 3 sons that we was trying to raise and have a career too. It's funny, people ask me now, how did you do that? Because it's very different today than it was then. And I have grandchildren now, and I tell my daughters-in-law, it's like, well, can't you just put them in childcare? It isn't childcare anymore. The childcare that we had does not exist for them. And so that's another story. But yeah, so I went through that. And honestly, Sarbanes-Oxley came out. Thank you, Enron. Sarbanes-Oxley came out, and accounting was not going to be fun anymore. Accounting was going to be tax and audit. And that was not me. I was a strategy person. I like to find the loopholes. I like to find the out-of-the-box thinking. And so a client of mine, one of my big clients, had always told me, if you ever want to leave, let me know, because I need a succession planning for my comp and benefits international HR director. So I called her. And so I made the hop over to the client into the HR world. And I had 0 HR training other than I've been working with global human resource functions for probably 15 years. When I
Awesome.
went through, made that change over to human resources, I thought I knew so much. I was a senior manager at KPMG. I knew everything. I knew about 2 things out of about 10 that I needed to know. So I got to learn how operations actually work. I learned all the different pieces of it, moved over to a Korean corporation as well. That's another story.
I bet that's a cross-cultural
Oh,
study there for sure.
it definitely. I was working for a French company, and I thought they were paternalistic until I moved to a Korean corporation. That was even
Mm-hmm.
more paternalistic. So I have always been in that male-dominated field, and so I've always been a little bit of a boss, very driven, which I
Mm-hmm.
think we had to be back in the 80s and 90s. And that was what we were told to do. I mean, our predecessors from the 60s and 70s, and talked about in my book, be as aggressive as hell. Don't take no. You just keep going. And that was my mentality.
Mm-hmm.
That was my mentality for 25 years. And I thought it would get me exactly where I needed to be.
It's a playbook that worked for you, though.
It did. It worked for a
Right?
lot of us, but it's a bad playbook. It was
Mm-hmm.
not written for us. It was written, well, a lot of times it was written for males. It wasn't written for, we don't have to be a male to be successful.
Mm-hmm. That's a mic drop there. Yep. So you talk about this kind of timeout, and you tell me about that when you sort of realized the playbook wasn't working.
That I don't think I realized the playbook wasn't working until it didn't any longer. I wasn't happy, but this is just what we do. This is just how you do it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think if God had not given me that time out, quote unquote, I don't know that I would have stopped. I thought that I would, but I don't know that I would have. And I think, honestly, I think he knew that I wouldn't have. My husband and I lived apart for 7 years. We saw each other maybe twice a month. By the grace of God, we're still married, 46 years and counting. But that was really, really hard. A lot of us could not have done that. And so it really gave me that time to go, wow, is this what I want? And I wasn't sure what I wanted at the time.
So, this is really actually very interesting. I actually had a meeting with an old mentor of mine. We hadn't talked in a few years, but spent a couple of hours earlier this week, and she shared very similar sentiment. Was a president in a Fortune 100 company, was really kind of driving a lot of stuff. When you're in the thick of it, it's hard to realize you're not happy. What advice do you have for people who are in the thick of it and they're wondering, like, is my life always going to be like this? I'm having problems even getting bathroom breaks. Some of it's like that simple.
I think as a leader, you have to set that tone. I won't lie, I'm not the best at it. I still revert sometimes to, it's like, sure, I can fit.
We're all growing.
And man, but no, you have to have some white space in your calendar. You have to have it so that you have some time to reflect and go back and think about what it was you just had. And I think in today's world, Rachel, with the remotes and the Zooms and the meeting after meeting, do we even know what we just talked about? Do we just, or do we just move from meeting to meeting to meeting and not really concentrate on what were the actions items I said I was going to do and how am I going to do that? And am I getting ready for the next meeting? And am I giving my full attention to that next meeting?
You also talk about this shift from bulldozer to builder. Tell me about the behaviors and sort of the mindset in each of those. How are they different and how did you make that shift? I mean, I would even assume that there are some you had to learn new skills. You had to do some different innate reactions as well.
Going back to the playbook wasn't going to work on how you manage, grow, design a global function for how you start a company. I've never started a company before. I mean, I had parameters. People gave me a job description and I kind of had an idea and I could play with it, but this was different. I knew I had a purpose because I could have just retired, enjoyed those margaritas on the lake, been more than happy to do that, but God just was not going to allow that to happen. And I knew I had more to give. And the more people I met, how could I tell them no when I knew how to help them? Why wouldn't I help them?
How did you find that purpose?
We talk about timeout, but let's just face it, it was a reorganization of a huge multi-billion-dollar organization. And
Hmm.
my job went away. It took me a long time, Rachel, to be able to say that out loud, because there was a part of me that's like, well, I retired. I had planned to retire. That's true. But to tell someone that you've been fired from a huge organization or that you built and you designed, that was tough. That was a lot of pride I had
Hmm.
to put aside. And it really helped me. Like I said, I talk about it in the book a lot, that I had been given a challenge by my pastor to read the Bible. Yeah, okay, fine. I'll get to that. I'll get to that. I'll get to that. Well, I had time, so I got to it. And the more I read, I was just floored by the similarities of how a biblical marketplace was so similar to a modern day marketplace, how warriors and leaders, before Christ were very similar to the same attributes that we're doing today. For the first time I ever decided I was actually going to write out my prayers. I had never done that before. I'm not a big
Mm.
journaler. And I did
Hmm.
that. I sat down and I actually, instead of just speaking it in my head or whatever out loud, I actually took time to write it. And how powerful that is. If you can discipline yourself, whether it's, prayers or journaling or anything, to write it down and go back later and read
Hmm.
what you wrote, it all came true.
There's a real intentionality to that, right? Too, to sit
Right.
down and write it out and set this time aside. Um, I'll have to link to it. There's some Harvard studies around even like manifestation,
Right.
where if people spend the time to sit down and write things out, that the outcomes that they're seeking are significantly more likely to um, come to fruition. And that's it's
Absolutely.
something I think about a lot, actually. And I will tell you, I don't write enough. And it's funny. Again, one of those things, and I will link to her. Her name is Sarah. There was a free webinar. She was linked to Adam Grant, as the professor and author. And I ended up as someone who also wasn't particularly reflective. She has these writing workshops, and I didn't even know I was getting into a writing workshop. And I show up, and it's a practice. Interestingly, I've started as well, but it's one I want to get better at in 2026. I think we should all have that as a New Year's resolution. I think you were running HR operations across 30 countries, and you talked about drinking soju and singing karaoke, and you're playing the game with the boys. What did working across cultures and kind of navigating those gender differences teach you?
My leadership had always been a very Western leadership. I'd worked with
Mm.
European countries, I'd worked with companies, I'd worked with US companies, and had some dealings in Asia, but never actually worked for an Asian company. And this is very, very different. And all of my leaders were Western as well. So when my CEO and my CHRO are telling me what they want me to do, well, I'm going to do what I'm told to do, but I'm going to be very Western. It was
Mhm.
probably my fourth CHRO who was not, he'd lived a long time in Asia. And he's really the one who came in probably what a month after he came in. He goes, wow, girl, I don't know what you've done, but you've alienated your Asian counterparts. And I want you to come to Korea for 2 weeks and you're not to have a single meeting. You're not to move anything forward. I don't want to see anything out of you but learning how to drink soju and sing karaoke. And I'm thinking, I don't think I'm going to like this at all. That's not who I am. But if you say so, it's a free trip to Seoul. So, okay, I'll try it. And what I learned was it is very different. So we talk about being one of the boys. Well, that's Western boys. Now I'm looking at a different culture, and that among itself was completely different. I was only
Mhm.
one of 4 female executives in that entire corporation. Um,
Mm.
I learned later, especially like in China, how the young Chinese staff, the young Korean staff would really look up to me because I was a female executive. What they wanted to
Yeah.
be, but their culture did not necessarily allow that. So I was
Mhm.
trying to show them what it could be, but also had to fit within those realms of what was required for that leadership. And I think for me, a little bit of imposter syndrome sometimes being a female, especially leading a male team. And the story that I talk about having to get up and give a speech. Imagine getting up in front of 40 people. They're all drinking. There's maybe one other female in the entire group. And you're leading your team and, giving a toast for the company and your division and what you're going to do, et cetera. And the CEO really wasn't looking for that. He just wanted, like a 2-second, if you're done. His favorite word was bottoms up. Bottoms up. I never got a bottoms up, thank goodness. But it's, I think learning how to deal with those different cultures, you have to learn to read the room. I had to research. I had to be open to different ways things are done and realize that it is not necessarily wrong. The same is true. I'm a CPA. So I would always say, well, is it illegal or is it just the way things are done? And having to understand that, from a corporate standpoint too, every country and every society is different. And we don't violate our principles, but you also have to understand theirs too.
Hi, quick pause here. If this conversation is landing for you, do me a favor and hit subscribe so that you don't miss the next one. And two, I do get some data about who my audience is. And the more I know about you guys, the better I can create content for you. Also, if you know someone who's navigating some of these same questions about the future of work, send this their way. These conversations are better when they're shared, and the more people that join us, the stronger this community gets. And honestly, that's the point of this whole thing anyway. We're all figuring it out together. All right, let's get back to it. You just sort of hit on this. My next question too is, how do your background as a CPA and how does that shape how you think about building organizations? Because I think that's an interesting part of the architecture here.
Yeah, and I think, one, I've always understood a balance sheet, a P&L. And I know, yes, if you have no money, I don't care how great your program is, you're not going to be able to roll it out. So you have to balance that. You have to balance it with how you treat people, how you get the best out of them. How can you empower those people with what you do have? Because sometimes, I think it's very Western of us, we throw a lot of money at people. And we think that's going to actually solve the problem. But it's not really what the problem is. The problem is coming back to, are you giving value? Are you making that person feel valuable? Are you empowering them to learn the best about them and to get the best out of them? Because guess what? It's not about us. It's about them. And I think that was probably my biggest lesson in leadership. And it wasn't until I got fired that I really learned that it's not about me, the leader. It's how am I serving you? How am I serving my people, my team, my company, et cetera?
It's really interesting as you're kind of talking. I'm having quite a few reflections. I'm going to unpack them in a minute, but I want to talk a little bit about to PZI and as you built the organization and you did it intentionally as a faith-based company.
I did.
And you're clear that you don't have to be Christian, but what is that? Like, what does faith-based mean to you? And like, how does that show up?
For me, it's very, very servant leadership driven. It's all about how I treat other people. And, how I use my faith is something bigger than me. And that I'm here for a purpose and I'm here to make impact on other human beings. That's what I consider faith-based, that we put people first because human beings are really, they're God's creation. And that's what they're all about. I don't care what religion you are. I don't care what faith you are. But do you have that faith of understanding of how you treat people? Because there are certain religions that don't necessarily do that. We live in the real world. But a true faith filled the way that we consider it, PZI, will always treat people first. We're zealous. We're zealous about people. We're passionate.
Yeah, that sort of human-centered aspect, I also think is becoming just even more critically important as we move into this sort of like digital age.
Yes.
Yeah, and yes, absolutely. It's been interesting how I think lack of connection that people have, and maybe some of it's driven by remote work, but it's also that, they're missing some of these opportunities because they're on their phone. to have the connections with different humans and, make the kind of relationships.
100%. Like, I mean, yeah, I grew up in the old days. Business was done in the hallways. They were face to face. They were connections. Okay. It wasn't necessarily in the business meeting. It wasn't, during the meeting time that business really happened. It was, hey, you brought up a good point in the meeting. Can we grab a cup of coffee and talk about that? And
Mm-hmm.
I think, you have to be so much more intentional in a remote work environment because you're moving fast. You're moving from meeting to meeting, and maybe you meant to have that conversation, but something else came up. Somebody else popped in, a Teams chat came in, a text came in, and you got distracted. So
Yeah.
being intentional about that connection is hard. It's not easy.
No, and it's a really good point. I love actually that practice, whether it's rooted in your faith, but that focusing on the humans, staying connected with them. What else would you tell leaders who are listening? And maybe even that their values come from a different place. Like they
Oh,
may not have a religious tradition.
I
How
don't
does
even think
that?
it matters. I mean, I'll
Yeah.
be honest with you. Like I say, we have people who are not faith based, and we have people that are other faiths in our company. It doesn't matter. I think for us, it really comes back to: are we wanting to make an impact? And what impact? Are we wanting to make an impact for me? Are we wanting to make an impact for others? Are we wanting to
Mm-hmm.
impact our communities, our children, our schools, whatever that is? Is that what we're trying to do? Are we serving those people? In this culture, in our culture, you're taught to take care of you. If you don't ring your bell, nobody else is going to ring it for you. And I remember being told that very, very clearly early in my career. And that's not really true. I didn't make the connections so that other people could ring my bell for me. And when I started making those connections and I started ringing other people's bells and not mine, things started happening. Amazing things.
Yeah, uplifting others.
Mhm.
There's so much responsibility too and privilege that you get
Yes.
to do those sorts of things. Yeah. So this concept of you've used the term business Jesus. Is that what, like, the servant leadership, that's what you mean? Tell me more about that.
Yes. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think, let's face it, Jesus I mean, we're still following his teachings 2,000 years later. I don't know a leader we're still following thousands of years later what they taught and what they did. So when I say I want to emulate business Jesus, it doesn't matter if you're in business, if you're in the music industry, if you're in any industry, there's a piece of you that is driven from how am I treating other people? What impacts am I making on them, good or bad? So when I
Yeah.
talk about business Jesus, that's really who I mean. Is I'm trying to emulate the things that he did. They're so impactful. If I could even be a tiny bit like that, and people say, "Wow, that's really good. You're making that impact," then I know that's where it came from. We pray. I mean, if you're in business, if you're an entrepreneur, you better have something stronger than just you to be able to do that business because it's hard. It can't be just me anymore.
I love that. And it's so intriguing to me in the corporate culture in this day and age. They talk about bring your whole self to work, but many people don't feel safe, especially related to religion or faith, which is a huge part of, many people's
Who you
identity and
are.
who they are outside of work, right? Why do you think that is? Why is this like kind of still a boundary that we have a line in the sand and we don't acknowledge those things as much as maybe we should?
I think it comes back to connection, Rachel. You know,
Really?
uh, I think that we are so intimidated by connecting and adapting who we are to other people as well. That intimidation kind of keeps us away from bringing our whole self to work. And when you have an environment that says, you know what, I want all of you. I may not agree with you, and it's okay to not agree, but we always respect, we always bring it. And I need to know who you are because if I'm going
Yeah.
to work day in and day out with you, I need to know who you really are, not a facade of who you are. And I think in our culture, we encourage people to bring their facade, not to bring their whole self to work. As the leader, I'm always going, well, your resume looks great. Your work ethic's great. Your background's great. But who are you? Who
Hmm.
are you? What do you do when you leave here? And some people go, well, it's really not your business. That is true. I'm not interested in your home life. I'm not interested in what movies you go see. I just need to know where do you come from? Or do you just make a shift when you walk into our office and you make a shift back when you leave? What a terrible existence.
I can't even imagine how hard that has to be. I will say, I mean, I know a lot of people who are much more conservative in sharing
Sure.
who they are, and, much more than I am. I even had a pretty little bit of a debate with an old friend yesterday who was like, gave me some feedback about my LinkedIn post that was like, that was written for an extrovert like you. And I kind of chuckled about it. What you're really hitting on is you are creating an environment where people feel psychologically safe,
Correct.
right? To bring that. And with that becomes a vulnerability, right? Like they can show up and be vulnerable.
Yes.
And still be accepted for who they are.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that was not how I was raised professionally. So it was a big shift for me. And I think if I had not been given that time out, Rachel, I don't know that I'd made that shift.
So you mentioned you pray before meetings.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you guys reference faith openly. What about someone who came into your organization who might not be super comfortable with that or was raised in a different environment?
Yeah.
How do you guys handle it? Like, what if I didn't feel like praying that day?
Then you don't have to, especially big meals, Thanksgiving dinners, that type of stuff that we do. We'll say often, I'm going to pray in my faith. If you please do the same. In yours, or take a moment of silence. And we put that out there so they don't have to feel, uncomfortable about that and don't feel like they have to participate when they're not comfortable participating. In the office, I try to make it a point that, hey, I'm going to meet so it's a conference room 5 minutes before we go into the a meal if anyone would like to join me just in a quick prayer. That way it can be intentional. We don't care. It doesn't matter. But sometimes you're right. And I have had, leaders as well who were so intent on bringing their faith in that they did it to the detriment of everyone else. And it made some people feel uncomfortable. So I think we have to be, as leaders, especially as the leaders, we have to be cognizant of it. Know your people, for goodness sakes, know your people. Just because I'm a faith-filled entrepreneur does not mean that everybody else is.
And a lot of my audience, they're like, let's say director level, maybe mid-level management in a Fortune 500 company.
Sure.
Faith is important to them. How can they bring that to work in an environment that maybe doesn't offer the same kind of psychological safety?
Sure. I think we're all given a moment before a meeting just to get in the right mind space. I happen to use that time for a quick prayer for me. Courage, strength, and focus are 3 things I always pray for. I know that I need it in every single situation. And it gives me that. It gives me that moment to center myself. Maybe you're considering it that I'm getting in the right frame of mind before I go into a meeting or into a presentation. It's really the same thing.
My interactions with you, I'm not surprised to hear that, right? Courage, strength, and focus. But one other thing I really observe, and even like kind of through your story, is you're listening.
Yes.
Whether it's to your heart or your God or feedback from your CHRO that's like, you need to go drink some soju in South Korea.
Yes.
I think it's an interesting value because you also have to be open to criticism.
I've been told several times that I have I take criticism better than anybody, some people I've ever met. And I think maybe that comes from my years in the professions that I was in. That yes, when you're working in, I've raised four males and I have 4 grandsons and I've worked in all industries. I think it kind of just made me a little tougher that I can take it. But at the same time, I don't take it personally. If someone goes after me personally, that would be different. But if they're giving me feedback, if they're giving me advice, if they're saying you could have done this differently, or you need to look at that, that's a professional. And I'm always looking to better myself. I listen to Craig Groeschel's podcast all the time, and his tagline is, when the leader gets better, everyone wins. And I love that.
I agree.
I believe in that. I listen to podcasts. I do professional books. I instill that in my leaders. I think that growing up professionally, I did not have that. I did not have a mentor. I didn't have someone who told me I should be doing that. You get sent to management school, but that's not the same thing as in an early professional life of saying, keep your mind open to other ways of doing things, learn as much as you can, and then you decide what works for you.
I love that. So I'm hearing so much growth mindset too, and resiliency. Couldn't have designed that better. I mean, these are skills I also really very firmly believe. Even the research says that
Mhm.
people are going to need these for the future of work, right? As we kind of go into this new digital age and move away from concepts of lifetime employment. If someone doesn't have those skills,
Mhm.
I mean, aside from going to work in a male-dominated industry, how would you encourage someone to develop those skills?
I do think it's truly training, it's teaching yourself. Don't wait for
Mm-hmm.
somebody else to teach you.
Mm,
Go find podcasts, go find books. I think especially as leaders, as we get older, we want to share our experiences. Learn from them. You don't have to do them. Just you might pick up a nugget here or there.
well, I mean, it's true. And, sometimes the more senior that I get as well, sometimes I'm surprised by like leaders, even like yourself, and how vulnerable you guys can be. And you show up in the table when you're young, you feel like, you go present to the CEO, you're nervous,
Oh yeah.
right? But you don't realize they've been through all the hard stuff too. And they put their pants on one leg at a time
Yeah.
as well. Power, vulnerability, how when you are in a seat of power, it's easier to be vulnerable as well. In some ways. Do you agree with me? I've just been
Yes
thinking
and no.
about this a lot.
I think a lot of leaders feel they can't be vulnerable, that they have to be strong. They can't let any cracks be seen in them. I'm married to an ex-military man. Most of my workforce is, connected to the military in some way. It's a very strong focus on
Command.
always
Yeah.
command, always being in charge of yourself. But when you stop and you show that vulnerability, you had a question I really like. What if you're young and you're scared of being vulnerable as a CEO? Can you be vulnerable? I answer to my clients so they can hire and fire me.
Mm,
I answer to my employees. They can quit and leave. Take all of that information with them, all those skills with them. So I am always having to make sure that I'm serving them so they can serve me. And I think as a
mm,
CEO and as a young person who is scared to be vulnerable, letting your guard down a little bit, getting to know the person, but being
mhm,
focused on why you're there. Because you're right, CEOs, we don't have a lot of time. We're moving place to
mhm.
place to place. But a really good CEO, hopefully, will know who's coming to see them and at least take 30 seconds. Who are you? Tell me
Mm.
about you. What did you do this morning as you were driving into to work? What'd you listen to? It tells me a little bit about you.
Those are really good nuggets for sure. And I love that you're sort of framing like even as the CEO, you are beholden to someone, right?
Yes.
Sometimes it's a board,
Everybody has
sometimes
the ball.
it's customers. Yeah. No, I think it's a really good one. And in truth, I personally really think vulnerability, there's a dance between being vulnerable or too vulnerable
Yes.
in leadership. I read this case study a long time ago. It was from a woman named Sylvia Hewitt. She ran the Center for Talent Innovation. And it's this one that like sticks in my brain with a leader who she was new. She was going in as a president of a business unit, and it was in a time of real turmoil for the company. And she was trying to practice vulnerability, but went in and was too vulnerable at the beginning. She hadn't established some of the
The
credibility.
trust. Yes.
Yeah, and trust. And
Mhm.
so she went in and was kind of like, I don't know what we're going to do. It didn't land well. But also, if you're, for example, in a leadership team that knows and trusts you, I think about COVID as another example where we didn't know what we were going to do, right? And you had leadership teams coming together and you were having those conversations together and saying, well, I don't know what the answer is, but we're going to figure it out together, right? I suspect if someone went through and measured some of those things, those leaders who were vulnerable at the times and that really had some of that trust, that understood the art, probably did significantly better
Yeah.
than others that maybe didn't practice the same kind of vulnerability.
I think you're absolutely right. I think one, you have to establish your um your credentials. You have to,
Hmm.
whatever job it is, why are you there? Why should they trust you? They don't know
Hmm.
you. Why should they trust you? Just because I wrote a book doesn't make me an expert on leadership. Okay, I have to still make sure that I bring that with me, and people know who I am, and I'm practicing what I preach. As you get to know people, you have to work hard to find that. But
Hmm.
my staff finding their groups, and it's my managers finding their groups. There's my vice presidents finding theirs, and there's your outside groups too. And hopefully, whether that's in your church or in your schools or in your book clubs or whatever it is, that you have that outside group kind of helps you stay focused, helps you stay connected, and
Hmm.
gives you a place to learn from vulnerability and when you can be vulnerable and when you can't.
I think this is an important topic. And the reason why I think about this is like, I'm going to just use like AI as an example as we move into kind of this like digital space and we're trying to change. I mean, even learning how to prompt engineer and figuring out how to use these tools in different ways, you can fail. Like you may produce work that's bad.
Mhm.
There's a element of experimentation that does feel very vulnerable. And I actually have a just general theory that I think some people aren't picking up AI because maybe I've built my career on running this process the whole time. Or, I might use the tool and what I do is not going to work. There's a vulnerability with it. I think about that a lot about how can we remove as leaders some of what is like a risk, perception of risk for people so that they can try new tools, and how do I build this culture of psychological safety? So, I mean, for lack of a better term, and that people can bring both their mistakes and the good parts of their
Well, Rachel, we
whole
don't
self.
learn anything from success. We only learn from failures. And, I
Mm.
think it's oh my gosh, so many failures in my career that I probably should have been fired for. You
They
know,
do stand out, those mistakes, for
Well,
sure.
thank goodness I wasn't, and my leader said, yeah, don't do that again. And I try to always pay that forward.
Yeah,
I tell all of our staff, I expect you to make mistakes. Hopefully not really big ones that we can't recover from, but that's
yeah.
how you're going to learn. And the reality is I'm not always going to be here. Our lives are,
Mhm.
we only have a certain amount of time. So I want to make sure that I'm teaching those skills. And you can't learn skills if you don't make mistakes.
Before we fully wrap up, though, I want to just click on one other thing I thought was so interesting about your company is 85% of your workforce are military or spouses.
Correct.
There's got to be so much mission alignment around that. But I just would love to hear from you, someone who's done, veteran and spouse
So,
hiring. And I would love to know, what skills do you think military and their spouses bring to the table for corporate America? And why should we all employ more of them?
yeah, I think from that standpoint, military veterans and military spouses are so flexible. They're not given a lot of direction. The military says just go out and figure it out. And you
Yeah.
do. So they've learned the hard way of learning it, and they made things happen that never existed before. So having those individuals in your company that can think outside the box and come up with different ideas, be a leader who is willing to take that chance and open up those ideas to new ways of doing things. I think that's one of the biggest things that military and military spouses bring. They have had situations that corporate America will never have. I'll never
Yeah.
forget when my husband left the military, went in, and he's like, I just don't understand why they can't just make a decision. Even a bad decision is still a good decision. Just make a decision. And understanding corporate is like, well, because in corporate, you make a bad decision, you get fired. We're not going to work that way, PCI. I want to bring that experience. Even a bad decision is still moving something forward. And we always should be moving things forward in any organization. And that's what the military veterans and military spouses, we know how to always move things forward in a short period of time and make it happen.
What is one piece of advice that you have for the audience? If they have one takeaway, what should they hear?
Just say yes to opportunities. Don't be scared of them. Try new things. You may find out you don't like it. You may find out you're not good at it. You may find out you're great at it. I never would have thought that I'd be in human resources in a million years. but I love working with humans. That's what I was meant to do.
That's amazing. I love that. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that I need to ask you?
I think we could talk for probably 5 more hours easily, but
Oh,
maybe we'll save
100%.
that for you coming on my podcast.
Oh, I'd love that. When I started your book, I sort of expected the leadership attitude to be kind of like one thing and much, I didn't expect as much faith-based. And, as someone who, like, I will say my year of entrepreneurship, I'm much more faith-oriented probably today than I was. I've always had that rooted, right, in me, but I had a lot of lessons of saying yes to opportunities that open new doors. And it really resonated with me. And my biggest takeaway was the leadership attitude in many ways is like a skills framework, from this like active listening to the resiliency that you have and growth mindset. I think they're really important lessons for leaders to hear. And I really appreciated you sharing your story.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
It's very inspiring, and I so much appreciate it. So thank you very much for sharing your story with the Shift Show. And I hope that we will be, at minimum, podcast friends. Of course, in the show notes, we will link everything. So folks in the audience can definitely reach out to you. They will be able to, watch your stuff. And then as you also build your own podcast and kind of go on, I hope, a book tour for the leadership attitude. But
yes, we are.
When you kind of get through there, I'd love to keep things updated so folks know how they can find you.
Awesome. Thanks, Rachel.
All right. Well, wonderful.
So
well, thank you so much. If this conversation sparks something for you, if you're thinking about how you show up at work, what you're willing to be honest about, or how you lead from a value-based when you're not the one in charge, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a note in the comments, send me a message at theshiftshow.net. And if you know someone who's wrestling with the authenticity question, send them this episode. I'm Rachel Bourne. This is The Shift Show. Let's stay ready.